So I get into the final episode of our lecture number 6, and we're gonna talk about the cloning. Cloning and its influence for the further development of the genetic engineering and the ethical issues for the bioethics reviewing of such an element and the system of the knowledge, such elements in the system of the social requirements as the cloning itself. So the medical issues of the cloning and the biological issues of the cloning, it's closely related to the aspects of the bioethical review. So that is why this question will also get the impact for the development of the bioethics and the further changes which we will face on. The word clone derives from the Greek word klone, referring to the horticulture process whereby a new plant is created sexually by planting a twig in the nutrient-filled water. In modern science, cloning refers to reproduction of the genetic material of an ancestor organism without sex. So that is why the clone and the system of the cloning is getting the influential part on the the systemological point of view of the reproductions, and the reproduction itself getting the new impact for the understanding of the cloning as the systematic approach and the functions which we will get to the cloning related to the understanding of the reproduction. There are three kinds of cloning: merit separation, cloning of cell lines or tiny organisms such as embryos, cloning of non-human animals to produce new live letters, and human reproductive cloning, also known as cloning to produce babies. These three kinds of understanding of the cloning, the three lines in getting the development of the cloning, closely related to actually the functional impact of the understanding its procedure in the bioethical sense. At the previous part we were talking about embryo, and that's why the cloning cells, lines or tiny organisms, that's the impact which we have also in the development of the reproduction system concerning the embryos of the human being. Of course, here we first of all are getting the impact of the cloning system related to the animals. So that is why the second relative line of the development of the cloning, like cloning of the human animals to produce new, it's the result of the development of the science which we are facing starting from 1996. Yes, the first Dolly case, when the question of the cloning of non-human animals being resolved and started to face on. We will talk about that a little bit later, but the problem here is to compare what does it influence. If in case of embryo we are talking about the systematic approach of the future life and the system, how we are getting to the cell lines. Here the bioethical questions relates to the question of the life, the future life, and the system of the changes we are facing, and the life as the phenomenon which is not related only with the creation, related with the, for example, if we're talking about the human embryo with the human being, right? But also it's related to the system of the reproductive, and the third line, this human reproductive cloning, also known as the cloning to produce babies. It's not approved by the community because it has the different bioethical approaches over it. It states, first of all, it's related with the historical and religious approach over the system of the viewing of the life. As we were discussed at our second lecture, the genesis of the bioethics issues. We were faced the problem of the life, and right now it's related with not just the reproductive technology, reproductive cloning, but also with the question of the abortion. And both of these questions are related to the systematical approach of the life, and approaches related to the questions how it's supposed to be started and what are the ways of the cloning technology which can be used for understanding the actually the human reproductive cloning. And will it change the community? Will it change the social impact? We don't know. We are still in the procedure of the discussion. We are facing this problem, and these related questions will be also coming as the result of the formation of the technology and the education procedure. The most accurate description of cloning is somatic cell nuclear transfer, where the nucleus of an adult cell from the existing organism is taken and implanted or fused into an egg where the nucleus has been removed. And here we have this cell nuclear transfer as the procedure which is coming from the also biological inspiration, and it getting also the ethical impact. While we have transfer, we're supposed to have a certain donor, a certain description adult cell, which will be transformed to the egg where nucleus has been removed. So that is why we have implantant. And such an implantant, the problem of the implantant is also bioethical question, and especially while we're talking about the cloning, while we're talking about cell nuclear transfer. And so that is why the transition procedure, what can be the transferring transition procedure in the point of view of the bioethics, how it's supposed to be performed and what are the legal rules over it, because such a transfer is supposed to be related with not just the formulas which have been adopted by the biology, but also which is supposed to be adopted by the social environment. And here the main question for the cell nuclear transfer is correlation between the need of the cloning systematics and also the results which we can get from this nuclear transfer. Presently, if we're talking about coming back to biology, what mitochondria does is not well understood, but some significant genetic diseases ride on mitochondrial genus. Mitochondrial genus and small differences in mitochondrial genus in embryos may produce large differences in adults. Here also we have the problem of the biological invention into the embryos. You remember the questions which raised at our second part, and the implementation and the usage of the new technology, and especially if we are talking about the embryos, to the level of existence of the human being, and the way how this mitochondrial genus will influence the differences in adults. It's also the problem which we can face on while we're talking about the biological approaches, and also bioethical questions of the role of the medical system, medical health protection system. As the early embryo develops, random inactivation of the X chromosome occurs, and this X chromosome controls some later qualities of the adult. And here the main field of the research, while we're talking about the cloning, and main field of the research influenced by also the bioethical procedure. The question of the field, the question of the X chromosome have been debated over the recently years, and this recently years debate shows that there are still the problem of the influential over the human embryo, over those X chromosomes which are related with the human embryo. Because of this process, identical twins are not exactly identical. For example, they possess different fingerprints. So here we have also just the question of the identical twins, which we are coming to from the procedure of the cloning, but also they are not exactly identical while we are talking about some differences which are related with the result of the inactivation of the X chromosomes, which can be occurs, which can be influenced by the cloning procedure. Also, except the exactly identically procedure in the biological sense, we're gonna talk about in the bioethics also concerning the structure of the consciousness which the person will have. And the structure of the consciousness, it's also the field of debate in the contemporary medical science and the contemporary bioethic development of the problem of the cloning. For sure, these questions are not related with only the problem of the identification, not just the problem of the identical twins, but also about the system and systematic approach on the consciousness and the way how the human being is supposed to develop this procedure of the consciousness, if we are talking about definitely cloning of the human being, because all our topics are related with such a phenomenon and this particular. As a result of inactivation and mitochondrial DNA from the host egg, an embryo created by cloning will not be genetically identical to its ancestor. That's what you're supposed to understand, and we are still supposed to view it. It's the result of the experiments, it's the result of the influence of the biological experiments have been done on the cloning, and you're supposed to understand this. Inactivation of mitochondrial DNA from the host egg, it's not just the acceptable result, it's not just the way how it's supposed to be done, but also it's the results of only of the first stage in the cloning procedure. It's not be the same genetically identical to its ancestor, the result of such an inactivation. And we also, two genotypes will differ some from the ancestor and the result of the cloning baby. So that is why the problem here, in the sense of bioethics, lay on the procedure of forming the human being, lay on the procedure of forming the embryo itself. And for sure, the genetically identical body to its ancestor, it's not just the result of the cloning, it's also the result of the view on such a procedure. And here it wouldn't be the same in the sense of the identifying the human being to its ancestor. If we have not faced the social correlation between ancestor and the cloning body, the newborn body by the cloning, it wouldn't be the same also in the sense of the worldview. It wouldn't be the same in the sense of the strategy and psychological perceiving and psychological inquiry. For sure, here the problem of the understanding why it's important and why it will be the further development of the genetic procedure. That's also the fact that such a identification is correlated with the goals of the cloning. The phenotype of the resulting individual as an adult, in other words, how the genes are expressed in specific patterns, will also vary because, contrary to popular beliefs about genetic reductionism, how genes are expressed depends on what happens to them in utero and in childhood. So here we're also facing the biological problem on the way how the embryo develop in utero, and also the childhood creates the important role for the understanding of the resulting individual, for understanding the way how the resulting individual as the result of the cloning will see oneself in the social community, will see oneself in the social circumstances, and also perceive itself as the personhood, perceive itself as the human being. So that is why these two ways in understanding, two stages in understanding of the phenotype of the resulting individual in utero and in childhood also can be the question for the understanding of the cloning. Once more, we still don't have, and hopefully, I don't know, right, we still don't have any results of the bioethical, any results of the biological experiments over the cloning on the human being. So this is why we couldn't understand totally and fully the way how the phenotype will change, because the phenotype of the cloning non-human organism, that's another thing, that's another stages, because it has no such a thing as the consciousness, and certainly the formation of the worldview and the formation of the systematic approach of the personhood and the world which surrounded it also couldn't be seen on the cloning of the animals. A person originated by cloning from genus of an ancestor will not be an exact copy of that ancestor. It will differ, he or she will differ more from his ancestor than identical twins differ. That's because such twins at least share the same egg, right? If we are talking about the identical twins. Mitochondrial DNA and historical era, and usually the same parents and culture. You remember the stages of the in utero and in childhood. In childhood we have also the influence of the parents and the culture, which also the bioethical problem of the cloning. How this shift will take in the future in the case if originator of the human with resulting cloning will be done? What will be the influence of the culture? Here it's also the debatable questions. And to this impact of the cultural effect of the human being, we can act actually the knowing of the educational procedure and the influence of the parents' emotional environment over the childhood. So that is why it can be also the question for the understanding of actually the formation of the personhood and the vision of the bioethics. A being created from the human genus of a human ancestor, gested by a human mother and raised in a human family, would be a person. Yes, would be a person with his or her own point of view, with his or her own vision of the personhood of him or herself, and actually world which surrounds him. That's actually important for the bioethical approaches and constructs on the impact of the cloning for the future transformation of the human being. It would be a person, and it wouldn't be a zombie-like. It's quite fashionably can be named, or a subhuman, or as it can be philosophically stated. because here the personhood which is supposed to be raised in a certain human family will face certain impact on the values. And here the problem of the values, you remember it from the first topic, the formation of actually values. One of the source it's actually the formation of the values during the development in the family. And it's important that it will be also the question for the understanding of the cloning, and how it will be a result if somebody will see the cloning as the direct impact on the future human being from an ancestor. As a person, he would have free will, and that's important if we will compare the ancestor and actually the newborn baby from the cloning. The free will, and it could make choices about his or her future and character as other human person did. So that is why this question of the free will and the formation of the personhood based on the free will choice also wouldn't be the same as for ancestors. Here we also have the problem of the future cloning on the human being, and this discussion over the influence of the cloning on the reproduction system, assisted reproduction technology. Because the free will choice, it's also the changing of the actually human being. Some of the parents want to see oneself future, want to see the oneself wishes on the human baby. And it's quite the same as for the cloning, because people who wants to, who can, right, who, let's say, wishes to be cloned in the future, this problem will be faced on, because the problem of the free will and the choice, it's actually the main bioethical and philosophical procedure in formation of the consciousness and the formation of the state of the worldview. And such a state of the worldview choice will also make the structure of the consciousness, the structure of the values, which is important for the bioethical questions. So here, once more, the changing of the cloning of the genesis, it wouldn't be the result if we are talking about the free will and the will of the choice. But still there are the discussion concerning this free will, and maybe there are a lot of the research which, let's say, theoretically are facing the problem that in the choice itself can be also be transformed by the cloning and transliterated from the ancestor to the newborn cloning person. Many fears about cloning and genetics today assume genetic fatalism. Genetic fatalism as the question that it will cover every part of our life. The view that it's all in your genes, and the view that all your problems related with the health, all your problems related with your personal choice and the, let's say, the character itself are related with the genus. And this genetic fatalism also helping to receive understanding, helping to get the impact over the cloning. So these genetic fatalisms also have the bioethical roots. What are the bioethical roots for genetic fatalism? They are laying in the sense that the system of the values which have been formatted, system of the values which have been faced, and the choices which can be done can relate to the previous generation, can relate to the ancestor itself. And the genetic fatalism also getting the approach in the not just the recent years while we are talking about the cloning, but a lot of time beforehand. The genetic fatalism were faced by the community, by the system of the education, and also by the system of the overviewing the genetic forms which we can face on. The view is demonstrably false, and that's totally unacceptable by the science, at least the old part. So, although free will may be weaker than is commonly assumed, and here also we have facing a lot of discussion concerning this. It's all in your genes. So not all, but some parts of your acceptable willness, acceptable choices can be related with the genes. And maybe on another way, the genetic fatalism misunderstood, because a lot of source of our choices are related with the choices of our parents, the choices of our social environment. And also, some people may have less of it than others. Most people have someone, and these choices of the genesis can be questions in the future. For sure, the problem of the genetic fatalism is also related with the forms of the understanding, the cloning. The guard against letting the false assumption of genetic fatalism sneak into our thinking. We should be careful with our language about cloning. Already, the word clone carries a heavy negative connotation over the social discussion, over the procedure of the social formation. So that's why such a negative position, such a negative connotation also is the basement for the understanding, and it's the block for the development of the cloning on the human being. Cloning humans, which are not existed, is also widely believed to be unnatural and therefore wrong, in the sense of not just the biological but also ethical, philosophical, and the social one. While the premise is true, there is a suppressed premise needed to get the conclusion that everything unnatural is wrong. Is the premise true? Is this premise true? Who knows? And in the case of the cloning, we are talking about the unnatural phenomenon which can be acceptable, and the unnatural phenomenon which can be acceptable because on the way how we perceive the future generation. These new techniques of assisted reproduction, such as in vitro fertilization and artificial insemination of sperm, allow formerly infertile couples to take home much-wanted babies, that we have been discussed during the previous part of today's lecture. Although more radical, creation of humans by cloning is just farther along the spectrum of helping nature along. Why this spectrum have been have such a borders, have such a social implementation, social acceptance? That's just because of the understanding of the nature and understanding of the nature of the born. Since creation of the lamb dolly in 1996, scientists have successfully cloned many non-human animals, if we are turning back to non-human mammals who have been cloned. To date, it's have not allowed flesh or eggs from cloned animals in the human food supply, mainly because of alarmist fears about the safety of such food. You're supposed to understood that the cloning of the mammals, it's also the question of the economics. It's also the question of the economical procedure and the lack of the researchers. So this is why such flesh or eggs from cloned animals could not be used in the human food up to the moment. And that's the result of the discussion, that's the result of the formation of the impact of the cloning in the system of the bioethical discussion. Some critics assume that human cloning is intrinsically wrong and argue that anything leading to something intrinsically wrong is also wrong. But safe human cloning need not be intrinsically wrong, and such a crucial assumption needs specific and convincing arguments. In the meantime, bioethics must wrestle with the issue of when human trials of reproductive cloning would be ethical. And such a shift of the understanding when, so this means we're supposed to have certain circumstances when, what are the issues when human trials of reproductive cloning will be ethical and acceptable by the society. Will it happen or not? And as we have been mentioned about non-human mammals, that's the question of the economics. What will be the questions when the reproductive cloning is supposed to be faced and accepted by the society? Although some consider it before species, a minimal condition for ethical medical experimentation is to first test a drug or procedure on non-human animals. It's also so not only would scientists need to originate some non-human primates by cloning, they would also need to prove the primate babies normal and show that they could reliably, repeatedly and safely clone these babies this way in such a procedure, and also then see the way how it will raise from the primate babies to a normal primate. Once that had been achieved, it would be permissible to try to originate a human baby. If such a procedure we will face on is such a procedure of the bioethical discussion and the discussion over this question in the science will be faced on, it will first start on the experiments over the primate babies. The first attempt would certainly be an experiment. We can understand this. If physician discovered a problem in the first or second trimester of development of the embryo, the abnormal fetus could be aborted. However, the abnormality might not be discovered until the birth or adult sense. That's also the problem for the cloning of non-human mammals or the human babies. Some abnormalities might not show up until midlife. Also, how then the question raised, how then could such an experimental be ethical in the sense of the future human body? Two extreme views here should be noted. One holds that such experimentation could never be justified because scientists could never guarantee a perfectly normal baby to be raised and then grown as the human adult. The other holds that such experimentation is justified because any child created this way would otherwise not exist at all, and that's the question which I have been raised to and all bioethics raised over the cloning. The existence of the human being, the existence of the human as the species in the world. If scientists follow the first view, nothing new in pediatric surgery, drugs or care could be tried, because the same objection holds for this innovation. The morally important fact is that when researchers intend to help infants and have good reasons based on scientific theory and trials involving non-human animals to believe that new methods are like to prove beneficial. Objections to cloning can be grouped into 5 kinds, which we will discuss during the practical classes. First of all, it's harm to the human race. Secondly, harm to society because of the involvement of the cloning bodies. Third, harm to family, while we are understanding that the role of there will be a changing of the role of the baby who have been cloned. And fourth, evil moments of parents, while we are talking about the growing of such a person. And fifth, which is not the question of the bioethics itself, it's also interdisciplinary question, that's actually psychological harm to the child because the social environments will face him or her as the cloning baby. Let's come to the conclusion of the episode concerning the cloning. And first of all, the phenotype of the resulting individuals as an adult will also vary depending on the certain circumstances, certain social environment. That's theorizing conclusion. A person, also the theorizing conclusion concerning the cloning of the human being, would have free will and could make choices about one's future and character. We are facing this conclusion while we are talking about the human being of today. What will be for the question of the cloning, that's also the result of the discussion and for the future development. Critiques concerning the cloning of the human body assume that human cloning is intrinsically wrong in the sense of the ethics and in the sense of the religion. But what will be in the future, what will be further development of the cloning procedure, cloning discussion, that's the question of the upcoming years and upcoming decades. So thank you for the attention on our 6 topics. We concluded these topics by the topic of the cloning. Thank you so much.